Today, I would like to talk about food. You know, the third best human invention after water and sex. It's that thing at the bottom of the pyramid of needs without which you cannot watch this video, cannot do that backflip on TikTok, or have a good reason to meet all your relatives for your favorite holiday debauchery. I am terribly sorry to break it to you, but capitalism has managed to ruin even food for us. In this episode, we will see how this happened and what we can do about it. We only have a few years left to turn things around, or else we risk screwing up the planet badly for generations to come. Hello dear humans, my name is Vlad Bunea. I make video essays about how we must terminate capitalism and replace it with something better, economic democracy. We are in a terrible conundrum. We produce today enough food to feed 10 billion people at 3,000 calories per day, yet 2.5 billion people are malnourished and hungry. We throw away 30 to 40% of the entire food production, worth $400 billion a year. We have advanced high-yield cultures, food rich in nutrients, millions of videos with fancy recipes, and we are still not eating healthy. Obesity is rampant, topsoil is degrading all over the world, and our industrial agriculture still emits more greenhouse gases than all the cars, airplanes, and trains combined. Why did we get into this mess? It's quite simple. It's because capitalism. Most information comes from two books by Eric Holt Jimenez, A Foodie's Guide to Capitalism and Can We Feed the World Without Destroying It? You can view all the sources in the description below. Let's talk a bit about history. How did capitalism actually start? If we were to choose one event or one word to describe the beginning of capitalism, it would be this: enclosures. From as early as the 1500s, large landowners had the brilliant idea to enclose land with fences, ditches, and other demarcations and kick out the peasants living on them. Why not? There was so much land that could make them even richer, and those puny, ragged peasants were getting in the way. The plan was to force the peasants to work on that enclosed land for very low wages and very little food, while the masters were collecting the entire production of the land and turn it into more gold and fancy castles. In 1846, these visionary lords in England decided that they had plenty of riots and rebellions. It was time to go international for the production of food. The British Empire was getting built for a reason. This is the time when England became the first country in which competition, profit maximization, and capital accumulation drove the country. The strategy was as brutish as you could get. Go where the productive land and resources are, steal them by force, and dominate the local population for your infinite personal pleasure. Food was at the core of this imperialist capital accumulation. The working-class Britons were consuming locally sourced beer for calories and nutrients. It got replaced by imported tea and sugar because they made a nicer profit. Potatoes were brought in from South America largely because they outproduced wheat. To fuel all these crops, they needed, what else? Guano, nutrient-rich excrement of bats and seabird that either builds you a capitalist empire or gives you a worldwide pandemic. Because everybody was desperate to get rich from agriculture, they needed that guano like crazy. In 1856, US Congress passes the Guano Islands Acts, allowing American capitalists to confiscate 94 islands in the world until 1903. 9 are still American possessions today. To recap, why was all this happening? Because capitalism is a system in which goods and services are produced for only one reason: to be sold as commodities on the market. Why do they have to be sold? Because the seller needs to make a profit. What is profit? The difference between the cost of production and the price on the market. Why do capitalists need to make a profit? Because if they don't, they go extinct. Capitalism as a system needs to grow or die. It doesn't know any other way. It is built in from the time when the greedy lords enclosed their lands. Capital itself is not profit, is not money, is not material resources, is not workers, is not ideas, unless all these things get involved into making more capital. In other words, capital is value in search of more value. If capital sits and does nothing, it is not capital. But why cannot capitalists' businesses just stay the same size instead of growing? Because they eventually saturate the markets when people cannot buy as fast as they can produce. To paraphrase eminent dark philosopher Agent Smith, every mammal on this planet instinctively develops an equilibrium with the surrounding environment. But capitalism does not. It moves to an area, multiplies and multiplies until every natural resource is consumed. The only way it can survive is to spread to another area. There's another organism on this planet that follows the same pattern, a virus. Capitalism is a disease. After the 1918 global disease, farmers started to overproduce food, leading to a crash in prices. Capitalist investment abandoned agriculture, many farmers went broke. Wall Street got rich. Corporate profits rose by 62%, while wages for workers rose by only 9%. Food overproduction forced farmers into dumping milk on highways, slaughtering sheep in the fields, plowing crops into the ground in order to cut losses and bring up the prices. Even with the widespread agricultural industrialization, we have today as many small farmers as 100 years ago. 70% of world food is produced by small family farmers using 25% of the arable land. The other 30% is made by industrial agribusiness that is yearning to expand into the small farm territory. This is deeply counterintuitive and paradoxical. Several studies have shown this is true. 70% of the world food is made on 25% of arable land by small family farmers. Roosevelt began to address the problem with the AAA, Agriculture Adjustment Act. The problem was not lack of production, but low prices. And the problem of so many hungry people was not that they did not find food, but they were unemployed. To fix this, FDR instituted production quotas, food reserves, and taxes on the middlemen. After 1945, another smart move of northern governments was to use subsidies and quotas to maintain overproduction, yet again. The cheap food surplus was dumped overseas as food aid for Global South and hook those countries on American products to the detriment of farmers in the poorer countries. For example, India was forced to accept American fertilizers and hybrid seeds under the generous umbrella of food aid. Another big-time major delusion was the so-called Green Revolution that lasted from 1960 to 1990. This guy, Norman Borlaug, won in 1970 the Nobel Prize for developing high-yield dwarf hybrids of Mexican wheat, which were later introduced in India and Pakistan. He is credited for saving 1 billion people from hunger. However, this Green Revolution produced as many hungry people as it saved. How? Thousands of local varieties of wheat, maize, and rice were displaced by hybrids, reducing agrobiodiversity by 90%. Hybrids only work with lots of fertilizers, irrigation, pesticides, and farm machinery. The Green Revolution forced small farmers into bankruptcy and created a planet of slums. We are in no better position today. Huge monopolies like Monsanto, Syngenta, Bayer, ADM, Cargill, Yara, Coca-Cola, Tesco, Carrefour, Walmart, Amazon, because they own Whole Foods, are pushing more and more capital into agriculture and our food. They continue to believe profit will fill our stomachs. Why is food a commodity? Is this a good thing? A commodity is something for which somebody is willing to pay money. When more people pay for things that others sell, that activity or the place where it's happening becomes a market. Food is no different. But why does it have to be that way? Why is food treated like a car or a smartphone? To understand this, we need to look at how the value of food is constructed. Value, however, is not the same thing as price, but capitalism tries very hard to make it the same thing. Let's talk about price. Number one, supply and demand. When rich consumers in the global north discovered quinoa, they were willing to pay high prices for a limited supply coming from the Andes. Quinoa, known before as poor people's food, became too expensive for the poor, so they had to switch to imported bread or pasta so the hipsters can have their vegan quinoa eggplant parm boat. Number two, economies of scale. Remember what I said, that 70% of world food is made on 25% of arable land by small family farms. Small farms are largely more productive than large farms. Large farms typically produce less per acre than small farms, but because they are so big, they can move around more capital and can take more subsidies. They also use more mechanization, which cuts down labor costs per acre. They replace nitrogen-fixing cover crops, legume hay crops, animal manure with synthetic fertilizers. All these are reflected in the value of food. What is not reflected in the value is the social and environmental destruction caused by these methods. Now, let's talk about value before it becomes price. Number one, use value. Use value is how useful a thing is. Food is useful because it can be pleasurable to eat, keeps us alive, allows us to work and play, do backflips, play chess, and reproduce. This is different from the use value of a smartphone or a pile of holiday decorations. Number two, exchange value. Exchange value is the price a buyer is required to pay so they can access the use value of a thing. If there's no price, there's no exchange value because there will be no exchange between buyers and sellers. Number three, socially necessary labor time. Now we are building to what is behind all this. All commodities, including food, are made by people. All this labor within food is hard to perceive. When you go to the supermarket, the price doesn't tell you the name of the worker who picked that tomato, how many years it took them to learn the skills, how much it cost to feed, clothe, house them, and so on. The necessary labor time to produce a conventional carrot is 1/10 of what is necessary to produce an organic carrot. That's because organic farming is not mechanized and chemicalized like industrial farming. So an organic carrot should cost 10 times more than a conventional carrot, but it doesn't. The question should be, why isn't organic more expensive? Once organic food becomes a commodity, its exchange value is determined largely by the socially necessary labor time to produce an industrial carrot. We add to this that labor is exploited in the food system. Farmers and food workers are paid poverty wages, and the capitalist always pockets the excess of value of the products. Can small farms, organic or not, compete with large industrial capitalist farms? Not really. Yet, 1.5 billion small-scale and peasant farmers operate on niche markets to avoid the competition with industrial farming. They use community-supported agriculture, small-scale co-ops like dairy farms in Norway, favorable geography and regulation to survive and make a living. The contradiction between food as essential for human life and food as commodity determines its value. The more value the profit motive sucks into the pockets of capitalists, the more this value is distorted, disconnected from the real world, ruining our food with industrial chemicals, degrading the soil and leaving millions of small farmers poor and hungry. Land and property. Whose land is this land? What does it mean to own something? Ownership is an ability, a right, a contract that allows you to use, to benefit from, to dispose or sell that something. In order to exist and fuel the profit motive, capitalism wants to turn everything into private property, such as land, seeds, water, genetic information, knowledge. It demands protection from the state for its private ownership rights. Yet the moment products are ready to be sold and the taps of profit turned on full blast, capitalism wants as few rules and laws as possible. This institutionalized greed and monumental selfishness has led to massive deforestation, desertification, pollution, and the emergence of food oligopolies like Monsanto, Bayer, Syngenta, Cargill, Smithfield, Walmart, Carrefour. This method of understanding property has been invented only by capitalism. Indigenous peoples have never had this concept. To them, nature was not something outside of human existence that could be owned and exploited. Nature and peoples were one and the same, with soul and equal standing in the landscape of life. How can a river flow only for your family and not mine? How can the wind blow only for your family and not mine? In modern law, property comes in various forms, from private to public and common. Private belongs to me, public belongs to all, common belongs to a community. Anarchist Pierre Proudhon, in Property's Theft, rejected the idea that land can become the property of someone. Yes, individuals can still access the land and own the product of their labor, but cannot own the land itself. Elinor Ostrom's influential research with traditional societies showed that natural resources held in common can be sustainably managed and used without regulation from the government. Peace and good life for all. The moronic attitude of the capitalist market economy wants to make everything a tradable commodity that has a price, including money, people's labor, and land. Rent is the price of land. Wages are the price of labor. Interest is the price of money. Really, are these commodities? Land is nature. You cannot create land to sell it. Labor is people. How do you produce people to be traded? Money is not produced to be sold. It is meant to facilitate exchange, among other attributes. Rosalinda Guillen, farm worker, ecofeminist organizer, wrote, "Farm workers in the United States are the largest landless workforce in the food system. We are not just landless in that we don't own the land we are working. We don't even own our own homes. The biggest issue for many farm workers is that people expect us to live in farm labor camps. Labor camps are like a slap in the face, throwing in our faces how really landless we are, how little we count for in every day. When you live in a labor camp, the people in town know that you live there." The next move for capital is make use of land rent and land grab. Here comes the land speculators who buy land cheap and sell it high. We end up with situations when the price of land is much higher than its land rent because agriculture prices are increased artificially through subsidies, hoarding, speculation, and financial bubbles. A perfect example is the land price bubble in Midwest America. You can make there more money buying and selling land than farming it. Do you think Bill Gates is one of the largest landowners in America due to the goodness of his heart? Capitalism uses a mix of overproduction and low price, or uses stockpiling and high price to establish new markets and hook consumers to a product because the purpose of capital is to always expand, always grow. Capital cannot stay stable. This is the fundamental big fallacy of the profit motive. It hates stability. It's addicted to growth. It knows no other way. It acts like a virus. This is why, just like Agent Smith said, it needs to be eliminated, especially from an essential element necessary for human life, like food, if we want to keep Earth habitable for humans. There is already a large resistance against the virus. One example is the ejidos in Mexico. Ejidos are collectively managed tracts of land, usually divided into family parcels. Even when President Carlos Salinas de Gortari abolished the system in 1991 and gave individual titles to farmers, they refused to sell the land to industrial capitalists and maintain the ejido system. Why are capitalists doing agriculture? Capitalist agriculture is a contradiction in terms. When it does agriculture, capitalism leaves behind poverty, destruction, pollution. It doesn't even feed the world properly. Large-scale capitalist agriculture produces less than a third of world's food supply, even with the help of subsidies and insurance. Peasants and small farms produce the other 2/3 of the world food but are squeezed into less than 25% of the arable land, as I mentioned before. What is going on? Capital does not like going into farming directly because land cannot be moved around. The soil, fences, barns, farmstead cannot be outsourced. Another problem is finding seasonal skilled labor whenever needed. Workers need to be quick and strong. Crops are perishable. So when capital does agriculture, it wants to make farms work like factories. It tries to eliminate labor and expertise as much as possible. It tries to standardize crop phenotypes for quick harvest, quick ripening, long shelf life. We end up with chickens, pigs, cows pumped with antibiotics and hormones. We end up with GMO salmon that grows twice as fast as wild salmon. 97% of farms in the United States are family-owned. 87% of these rely on family labor. All these farms are the frontline producers. Between these farms and your refrigerator, you have the capitalist speculators. Financial speculation with agriculture futures in the 2006-2008 period made world prices for rice to increase by 217%, wheat 136%, maize by 125%, soybeans by 107%, pushing millions into poverty and hunger. Let us look closer at how capitalism poisons the production process, both literally and figuratively. On the upstream side, production, capital appropriates on-farm labor processes by replacing agroecology, which is green manures, cover crops, animal-based fertilization, biodiverse forms of pest control, farm-grown seed stock, with synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and genetically modified seeds. Appropriation wants to reduce complex farm labor into fewer and fewer inputs. Why? Of course, to give birth to more profit much easier. For example, Monsanto's GMO seeds have introduced Bacillus thuringiensis, Bt genes, and a gene that is tolerant to glyphosate, a powerful herbicide, into their seeds. The Bt genes replace pesticides, and the glyphosate-tolerant genes allow the cultivar to withstand applications of herbicide, that is, at least until insects develop a tolerance to Bt and weeds develop a tolerance to glyphosate. On the downstream sides, merchandising, processing, retail, consumption, capital substitutes direct producer-consumer relations with an army of middlemen: buyers, wholesalers, carriers, merchants, packers, growers, shippers. This substitution transforms farm products into an array of basic ingredients for a very large selection of food products sold in supermarkets. Yet again, the reason behind this transformation is to allow capitalists to dump new food products on the market all the time, to keep us consuming, to feed our appetite for novelty, and to satiate the profit motive. How do we fight against all these? With agroecology. Agroecology is the science and practice of sustainable agriculture. Farmers primarily use animal manures, legumes, and cover crops to provide nutrients. Weeds are controlled by cultivating, cover cropping, intercropping, and mulches. Pests are managed by attracting predators with companion planting, interrupting pest cycles, and vectors with crop rotations, alley cropping, in which annual crops are grown with rows of perennial trees and bushes, and the use of trap crops and repellent crops. Agroecology has been endorsed by the International Agricultural Assessment on Science, Knowledge, and Technology for Development and the former United Nations Rapporteur on the Right to Food as the best agriculture method to end hunger, eliminate poverty, and address climate change. So why is agroecology not promoted by the World Bank, the NSF, the CGIAR, the FID? You probably realize it by now that these institutions want to promote capitalist agriculture. They wrongly believe that the capitalist method is the right one to feed humans. This is how capitalism ruins our food. Power and privilege in the food system, gender, race, class. We have to talk about gender, race, and class in the economics of food. In the United States, over 30% of women earn poverty wages compared to 24% for men, and women are paid just 78 cents for every dollar men make to do the same job. The food system works partly because of this inequitable position of women, and it comes from patriarchy. Patriarchy came thousands of years before capitalism. It emerged when nomadic hunter-gatherer societies made the transition to agriculture. During those times, there was no private property. Many early societies were polygynous, polyandrous, and matrilineal. When agriculture started to demand more labor, men switched from hunting to working the field more, and women specialized in child care and household maintenance. Children knew their mothers but not their fathers. All men in the clan were considered fathers. When men accumulated wealth from agriculture, it became hard for them to pass it to their children if they didn't know who their children were. Therefore, patriarchy and property emerged so men can control the distribution of agricultural surplus. The rest is history. However, many indigenous societies did not fully adopt the rules of patriarchy, so it is not surprised that capitalism did not emerge in the middle of the First Nations of North America, for example. Today, capitalism employs a method that sociologist Maria Mies calls super-exploitation. We have the regular wage exploitation, which happens when capitalists keep for themselves what workers produce and do not share the profits with them. On top of this wage exploitation, we have the super-exploitation of non-wage laborers, women, colonies, peasants. It's called super-exploitation because it is based on the appropriation of the time and work necessary for people's own survival. Women are super-exploited because they are not productive while being pregnant and while nursing children. This is the gender bias in capitalism. Another example of super-exploitation are Mexican farmers importing to the United States to often work in slavery-like conditions from the Bracero program of 1942 to today. Which takes us to the next heavy subject, race. A stigmatized racial group locked into an unfair position by law and custom is known as a racial caste. Data confirms racial caste persists strongly in the economics of food. In 1910, African Americans owned 16 million acres of farmland. By 1997, after many decades of Jim Crow laws, farm busts and obstructionist Department of Agriculture, fewer than 20,000 black farmers owned just 2 million acres of land. Workers of color earn only $19,349 a year. 6% are white, 26.1% are black, 23.7% are Latino, and 23% are Native American. Race, poverty, and food insecurity correlate closely with obesity and diet-related disease. Nearly 50% of African Americans and 42% of Latinos suffer from obesity, while less than 8% of non-Hispanic whites suffer from diabetes. 9% of Asian Americans, 12.8% of Hispanics, 13.2% of non-Hispanic African Americans, and 15.9% of indigenous people have diabetes. When it comes to differentiations by class, at the bottom of the pyramid we have, yet again, the farmers themselves. Even if some of them own the means of production, they are like food serfs working and living under precarious conditions. Other farmers who may own land are under contract with large corporations to produce for the market GMOs. The next level in the pyramid is the food petty bourgeoisie. They're the small restaurateurs, retailers, producers for fancy niche markets, bureaucrats in government, philanthropic foundations, food entrepreneurs, celebrity chefs, food intellectuals who make ridiculous, ignoble entertainment out of the food system. Some have become incredibly rich while playing the capitalist game of exploitation. The internetization of food has created the perception that the food system must be about inventing clever food apps, finding authentic food experience, seeking healthy food. Farmers are present as individuals rather than a class with stringent needs and demands. Regular field workers are largely forgotten. The narrative does not address the oppression of women, people of color, and workers. It perpetuates the fairy tale that the food system can be improved without transforming the capitalist system. Food, capitalism, crisis, solutions. Are you too poor to buy food? Keep calm and start a business. And remember, the USAID Feed the Future might remember to have your back. Here's what the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, does not tell you. In 1996, 840 million people were hungry worldwide. Leaders from 185 countries met at the World Food Summit in Italy and drafted the Rome Declaration, promising to reduce the total number of poor and hungry people to 420 million people by 2015. 4 years later, in 2000, the Millennium Declaration changed the commitment from absolute numbers to a reduction by 50% of developing countries only, not the whole world, to make the goal easier to achieve. Because of population growth, this change meant ending hunger for only 296 million people. The trick was to change the goal from the whole world to a part of it. On top of this, to make it look like we are making progress, FAO only counts people as hungry when caloric intake is inadequate to cover minimum needs for a sedentary lifestyle. Let's say up to 2,000 calories per day. Not for intense activity like farming that needs over 3,500 calories per day. If we measured hunger at the level of calories required for intense activity, the number of hungry people today is closer to 2.5 billion. And this does not count those suffering from serious vitamin and nutrient deficiencies, or those hungry seasonally or for months at a time. Capitalism has made many more people hungry in the last 40 years, not less. The smartest and most insidious move in the past few decades was the narrative of biofortification and nutritionism. Biofortification is the process of scientifically breeding vitamins and nutrients into staple crops. Biofortified crops are promoted as miracle seeds that fix the problem of micronutrient malnutrition. Research has been funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and agribusiness giant Syngenta, by DuPont collaborating with the nonprofit Africa Harvest Biotech Foundation, and Monsanto working with the Donald Danforth Center. Even the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has donated $160 million to biofortification programs worldwide. What is in reality biofortification? It definitely looks like a Trojan horse for the capitalist corporations to grab more control of the food systems. Nutritionism is the scientific narrative that promotes the nutritional superiority of food engineered with more enhanced nutrients over whole foods. The story reduced world hunger to a problem of insufficient nutrients without asking why nutrients are lacking in the first place. The hard truth is people are hungry because they do not have money to buy food, not because science has not figured out a fancy way to feed them. The hard truth is farmers are nutrient deficient because they don't have enough land to grow a balanced organic diet. These are political, not technical problems, which happen because capitalism has vitiated the food system. Around the world, rural communities resist and avoid the capitalist food regime. They navigate the edges of the market economy, experiment with various forms of production, of ownership, of consumption. Agroecology may be viewed as a form of protest against capitalism, since its driving principles are driven by knowledge, tradition, and community, instead of maximizing profit and stealing labor from others. Agroecologists know that the practice of polycultures, companion planting, increases agriculture's net primary productivity. 3 hectares planted to a mixture of maize, beans, and squash yield much more than a hectare of maize, a hectare of beans, and a hectare of squash taken separately. In contrast to capitalism, the process of accumulation of agroecological wealth, fertility, agrobiodiversity, soil and water conservation happens largely outside the circulation of commodities and is controlled by the farmer. No wonder that corporate agriculturists are criticizing the apparent low productivity of agroecology. These criticisms are based on low output per farm worker, because much of the land farmed agroecologically is not mechanized. But capitalists ignore the evidence demonstrating that the high productivity per unit of land and the strong resilience of agroecologically managed peasant agriculture, and forget that the first green revolution required the massive structural mobilization of state and private sector resources. This makes the solution rather obvious. Farmers need support to develop agroecology, need to have enough land, and need help to live a decent life. Capitalism is unwilling and incapable of providing all that. Can we feed the world without destroying it? In an era of unprecedented economic inequality, hopeless future for millennials, Gen Zs, Gen Alphas, and deep political disillusionment, food has become a surrogate for hope and freedom. Capitalism is disconnecting humans from nature, from community, from themselves. No surprise so many people try to reconnect to themselves and with others through food. Each year, 7% of planted fields in the United States go unharvested. In industrial fisheries, up to 60% of the catch is discarded even before it reaches port. 75 billion tons of crop soil are lost every year, valued at $400 billion. Soil erosion and degradation have reduced productivity by 50% in Africa and 20% in Asia. Then we have the ecological hoofprint that comes from 70 billion farm animals slaughtered annually. So why do people go hungry? Because they don't have money, not because food is going to waste. Capitalist agriculture is impossible without industrial fertilizers. Large amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus are dumped into rivers, lakes, and oceans that lead to algal blooms. When algae die, their decomposition uses up all the oxygen in the water, hypoxia, resulting in massive fish and crustacean die-off in areas called dead zones. Today, there are 406 dead zones covering an area larger than the United Kingdom. Prominent dead zones include the Gulf of Mexico, 22,729 square kilometers, the Chesapeake Bay, 7.25 cubic kilometers, the Baltic Sea, 60,000 square kilometers. As the hypoxic dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico demonstrates, not only has the metabolic rift led to urban and rural pollution, but also capitalist agriculture is now a major source of marine pollution. To perpetuate the moronic profit motive, food producers have been forced to run on two treadmills, technological and chemical. On the technology treadmill, farmers are forced by the market to adopt new technologies that reduce labor and management, to reduce per unit cost of production. Why? So the total production can increase. The downside is the more production you have, the more prices will fall, the less profits you have, and then more chances to go out of business. The technology treadmill has caused chronic overproduction and pushed farmers off the land for decades. The chemical treadmill comes from the sustained use of industrial pesticides and fertilizers that were supposed to eliminate, well, the pests. But evolution and chemistry are hard-ass bummers. Pests are becoming more chemical resistant and fertilizers deplete the soil of natural fertility. Can we have climate-smart agriculture, sustainable intensification, and conserve biodiversity? No. Industrial monocultures produce more per unit of labor because of their high degree of mechanization. As I mentioned before, small farms consistently outproduce large farms in kilograms per acre using polycultures. The hidden purpose of technology is not to make more produce, but to use less people in the field, therefore more profit. So, what can we do about it? If we were to put solutions into a soundbite, it would be this. We can fix the food system by giving poor people more political power. Capitalism has not yet won the war against humans. Agroecology is fighting back and gains momentum. The village of Pununkula in the Indian state of Andhra Pradesh went from being the pesticide capital of India, with dozens of farmer pesticide poisoning every year, to becoming completely pesticide-free. The seed freedom movement in Uttarakhand, India, has blocked patents on the ubiquitous neem tree. They have conserved over 3,000 rice varieties. The Brazilian landless workers movement has mobilized hundreds of thousands of landless farm workers to take the Brazilian constitution at its word. They invade idle lands that were not performing a social function, effectively implementing their own land reform. The movement has carried out over 2,500 occupations and settled over 1 million families on the land. The World Social Forum was started in 2001 in opposition to the World Economic Forum. Hundreds of thousands of people attend from around the world. The international peasant movement, La Via Campesina, and its 200 million members hold national, regional, and global gatherings to advance the cause of food sovereignty. Let us put solutions and calls to action into a nice list. What can you personally do? The following is not a definite list. It is common sense. Have zero food waste. Save and repurpose all leftovers. Plan your meals in advance. Think well about how much you cook. Do not buy food packaged in non-recyclable materials. Buy locally sourced food as much as possible. How can we change the system? We can dismantle capitalist agricultural corporations and turn them into decentralized, democratic farmer cooperatives. One farmer, one vote, one share, non-tradable. Profits remain within the cooperative. Farmers must have production quotas to avoid overproduction. Farmers' incomes must be guaranteed, stable, and protected. Food must cease to be a capitalist commodity driven by profit. Environmental and social costs must be reflected in the price. Food will be more expensive, but everyone will afford it. French political economist Timothy Paric has summarized the policies from an economic degrowth perspective as follows. Number 1, sustainable agriculture. Promote peasant agriculture. Promote organic farming. Certify organic farming based on CO2 emissions. Reform agriculture education on the basis of local permaculture. Number 2, food sovereignty. Guarantee a right to hardening through land and reappropriation of municipalities. Relocalize agricultural activities. Number 3, reduce meat consumption. Vegetarian menus in schools, kindergartens, hospitals, and nursing homes. The Great National Debate, launched by the French government in 2019, listed 9 categories for agriculture policies: organic, local, vegetarian, seasonal, sustainable, healthy, convivial, fair, ethical. In conclusion, dear fellow humans, thank you for watching all the way to the end this introduction into the economics of food. I hope it was worth your time. If you find my videos helpful in any way, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/Vlad Bunea. Your donation is very much appreciated. I will never read advertising during my videos like other YouTubers. I rely 100% on your support. See you soon. Live long and prosper.